Right, welcome back and thank you for choosing to stay with us. Remember, you can be part and parcel of this discussion and we want to get your views and thought on this particular topic. Remember, we're talking about the state of devolution, and of course, to help me, unpack this particular conversation is my guest, that is Kevin Osido, Executive Director of County Governors Watch. And of course, we take a look at various issues and of course the fight between the county government and of course the national government over underfunding and of course devolved functions that are meant to be under the devolved unit. So why are county government, of course, or why are governors bitter with the county government? So this is why. Remember, one of the key factors that governors are actually, faulting the national government about is the underfunding, where the Council of Governors had proposed 450 billion, that is allocation for the financial year 2024-2025. Then the government proposed disbursement of 391 billion. That is a deficit of around 33 billion. And of course, this has raised, a lot of questions and of course the bad blood between the county government and the national government. So the reason number two why the governors are bitter with the executive is the holding of key devolved functions. Among them include health, then we have agriculture, and then remember, recently there's been, public spat between the county government and of course the executive about the housing, the affordable housing, where the governors are faulting the government over, the entire process, or rather the way in which the government is building this, and they believe that this is falls under the devolved unit. Another area of concern is the payment of community health promoters. I remember last week, Council of Governors gave Deputy President a wide berth, given the fact that this, they believe, is an area that should be under their domain. So that is the discussion we are having tonight, and we're inviting you to be part and parcel of this discussion. Talk to us. It has been over 10 years since the devolution, and of course, what are some of the gains have we made? Are we really, we are talking about the hit and misses. So how far are we as far as devolution is concerned? And of course, that is a good point now to welcome in my guest, Mr. Kevin Osido. This is the Executive Director, County Governors Watch. Mr. Osido, good evening.
Good evening to you. How are you, Evans?
I'm pretty good. How have you been?
Not bad, just busy running up and down, and thank you so much for having me for your very important conversation this evening.
Indeed, it is a very important conversation that touch on the very fabric of our constitution. And of course, devolution came with the promise of, bringing services closer to people. And of course, in this line, there has been some talks and even, the spat between the county and the national government. So I'll begin by asking you just a simple question. Is devolution under threat?
Evans, devolution so far is under threat. And why this is important is because if you look at the body language of the Kenya Kwanza government, there are lots of positivity in terms of the talk, the narrative, and even some of the mechanisms or processes that are being put in place to ensure that devolution is protected. But if you look at the spirit of all these things that are being said, that are being put in place, and all the processes that are going on, the goodwill is seemingly really lacking. And so that is more or less like a telltale sign that devolution is under threat. And if you look at the second thing, which is purely the complaints, the issues that have been raised by the governors of the 47 counties through the mechanism called Council of Governors, you realize that since Kenya Kwanza government came into place, as much as the president has insisted and the deputy president has continuously reminded us that they have already given counties resources which they require, to be honest with you, and from the narratives of the people who are actually where the rubber is meeting the road, the governors, that has not happened. So we have a lot of positive talk. We have a lot of seeming goodwill, political goodwill, but that is not being shown in the action of the people who are supposed to be acting quite more responsibly from a higher level.
All right, well, Mr. Osido, the government says, and if you are keen to follow President William Ruto's, speech during the, Kenya Kwanza cabinet retreat, Mr. President said that their hands for now are tied because the country is grappling with the public debt that they have to meet. And with all this, do you think maybe it's some sort of, we can give a government a leeway as far as this particular, this issue of county and of course the, funding of the county is concerned? Remember the budget that we are talking about that the national government has proposed to counties is 391 billion against what the governors were proposing, around 450 billion. Do you think maybe the president has a point when he says that their hands are tied?
Evans, the president, he has a point as a president, but he doesn't have a point in practice, particularly when you look at what I initially called the goodwill and looking at the historical engagements between Kenya Kwanza government and county governments. And the president, in my view, should be much more aware about the challenges that counties have been facing, particularly when it comes to disbursement of funds, either late or minimal or less disbursements. And I say this because the president has been a deputy president for 10 years. And the deputy president is the chair of what is called the CBEF, the County Budget and Economic Council, actually, that therefore really looks into even funding mechanisms. What are county governments doing? What is the intergovernmental relationships between national and county governments? So the president, ascending from a deputy president, should have been much more informed, particularly if he was very interested and the Kenya Kwanza government was interested in making devolution work. So in saying so, the president, in my view, and looking at what the counties are going through, and in fact, by practice for the last 10 plus years that devolution has been implemented in this country, he should have been the first person to ensure that resources are following functions. So when we make sure that resources are following functions, the question about hands being tied would not have arisen. Because remember, for instance, that when you devolve functions, you fully devolve functions that are supposed to go to county governments, you are empowering these counties. You are giving them the opportunity to exercise what we call on-source generation, to generate their own resources, so that the potential of counties is fully maximized and they clearly understand how much resources they can be able to generate without purely relying on the national government, particularly through Treasury or Ministry of Finance, to be able to share or be able to send the monies back to them. Of course, we know that by law, what we call the Public Finance Management Act, all the monies that are collected are sent to National Treasury, and then out of that, the counties get their monies expressly. What we have seen happening, and probably why the president is using their hands being tied as an excuse, is because at the point of discharging or releasing disbursing these monies from the National Treasury to the county governments, we see certain functions that are still being held by national government, which therefore siphon, if I could use that word, a lot of money that is supposed to go to county governments. For example, health, where we are talking about heavy billions of shillings that are still being held by national government, whereas the constitution expects that the national government should only have minimum services, particularly when it comes to policy guidelines and policy guidance. So if you look at those kind of functions, health, you talk about water, you talk about agriculture, against the percentages that have been held by national government, if you were able to disburse those resources to the counties would have been able to therefore exercise their own source potential, either raise resources or put in place priorities that ensure that counties are moving on even when the monies are not coming from National Treasury, and that has not happened.
All right. And when you talk about, what President should be doing, last year, that is in September, President William Ruto actually promised to transfer all the remaining, functions that are underdeveloped, units. And of course, it has been, a couple of months until now, we haven't seen that happening. And that begs the question, so what is ailing devolution from where you sit?
The biggest ailment is goodwill. And if you look at what you mentioned, the president having spoken, particularly when it comes to issues of fully devolving functions, and this has been an ongoing conversation. In November, the president spoke about it. Last year in December, the president spoke about it. In fact, an analysis that we've done at County Governance Watch indicates that this has been a conversation that the president has had more than 10 times. Every time His Excellency the President has the opportunity to talk about devolution, he always speaks about fully devolving functions. Now, why I say there is mixed goodwill is because whereas there is a lot of laxity in devolving certain functions, particularly those that I would call macro embezzlers, macro engagers at the county level, for example, health, agriculture, water, housing, which is a big conversation because it's called housing and land housing and urbanization. We see the national government being very, very effective in devolving certain functions, particularly through intergovernmental relations and technical committee, which of course is set in place by law. Certain functions have been devolved. We have seen in the last few weeks or months museums being given back to county governments. We have seen libraries being given back to county governments. And that therefore means that there is a certain resource that is going back to county governments. For example, if you give county governments about 25 museums across the country, it means that there is a certain resource in terms of financial resource that counties will be benefiting. And so far analysis that has been done by Intergovernmental Relations and Technical Committee indicate that counties, about 33 counties now have reclaimed 61 libraries and are able to benefit or receive up to 425 million Kenya shillings. That is money that can do a lot in the counties. But why is it those kind of functions, Evans? Why are we not talking about health as a bigger macro gainer from devolution and resources? Why is it so slow when it comes to issues about agriculture and all the parastatals? Why is it such a big concern when it comes to water as a devolved function? Why is the national government engaging in housing, whereas housing is a devolved function? Why is the national government engaging in issues of land and all these petitions that we are seeing and all these conversations through the National Land Commission when it comes to acquisition of land for the housing programs to be done? There are bigger concerns and bigger conversations, Evans, that we need to be having, as opposed to, of course, museums are good if we give them to county governments. Libraries are a very good, resource when people are able to go out there and read and even meet and socialize. But we are talking about the movers and shakers of devolution. When sick people are sick, they don't go to, when citizens fall sick, they don't go to libraries. When people are thirsty and they're looking for water, they don't go to museums. They are looking for opportunities where county governments are able to ensure that there is water. And a lot of the times, we see questions being asked to county governments on devolved functions as opposed to national government functions. So yes, there is a lot of mixed goodwill, Evans, and the point at the biggest concern should be what is the responsibility of national government in devolving these resources and these functions, and what is the timeline, because that is also yet another concern. Despite all the processes, as I mentioned earlier, there is too much talk, there is a lot of mechanism that is being put in place, but we don't see that really translating into the time frames for devolving and ensuring that that county governments receive these functions. Evans.
All right, and you've actually raised a very important point in regard to why not have the conversation about some devolved functions like, let's say, health, there, agriculture. And this, point a finger to some extent the watchdogs who are actually known to be the champions or the defenders of the, county matters. I'm talking about senators. And in today's meeting, of course, Council of Governors have called upon senators to actually defend devolution. Do you think maybe senators have failed in their role as, to advocate for, county resources, defend the interests of counties, the function that actually they were elected to do it?
Very, very important question. And the straightforward answer to that is purely yes. But remember that the mechanism of the Senate engaging with counties a lot of times is hijacked politically. Because most of the senators, except for now that we also have some of the senators who are former governors, who in fact should be helping the Senate to be able to understand the challenges and the pains that citizens are going through when devolution is not working. A lot of the responsibility that has been given to the Senate is through what we call the DORA, the Division of Revenue Allocation Act. A lot of times is the DORA bill, the Division of Revenue Allocation Bill, which of course sets through the Commission on Revenue Allocation, sets the framework or the formula within which the National Treasury is therefore supposed to send financial resources for money back to county governments. That, in my view, has been effectively implemented. But if you look at the person who sends the money to the counties, it is not the Senate. There is an institution called the Treasury, an institution called Ministry of Finance. Why is there this laxity? Of course, that is where the senators come in. And there are many, many challenges because the appropriation of resources through the budget process is purely done by the National Assembly. Now, not even the Senate. Of course, it's Parliament, but Parliament through the National Assembly. And a lot of times you see there are a lot of many challenges that go on between the moment when the Division of Revenue Allocation Bill is passed and by the Senate and National Assembly goes on and appropriates. So the question is, who is supposed to protect counties at the point when we are talking about National Assembly conversations? That is a big gap that continues to exist because in the past we have seen, particularly from 2019, we have seen the back and forth between the National Assembly and the Senate. And that is purely where the questions around political goodwill come in. If we say, for instance, that funding that has been put for water that is still being held by national government is supposed to be sent back to counties. Imagine the number of counties that are going to benefit from the hundreds of millions to billions of monies that are being held by national government on water issues. Today the biggest conversation is on housing. The responsibility of the Senate is therefore not to go and ask why is the government still holding on to housing issues. A lot of times that conversation has taken place, but the goodwill to be able to ensure that the functions of housing that are supposed to be dispensed by county governments is not done by national government through the Ministry of Housing is not for the Senate. Of course, senators can be able to advocate, they can be able to speak, and today we are advising that they actually consider making amendments on laws that are stifling and holding back the county governments to be able to make the promissory notes that they had with the citizens. So, of course, the last issue about this is we've been talking about a parliament that has been whose hands have been rather parliament that has been hijacked, or parliament that whose hands have been tied. Where, for instance, if the Senate has a minority, for those who are supporting devolution, fully devolution of functions, laws will be passed that therefore do not favor counties, especially when the trajectory of the government in place is not to ensure that functions are devolved or that resources follow those functions. So a lot of the times, again, senators would feel much more closed. They will feel much more, I wouldn't say unnumbered, because there are very many mechanisms that you can be able to put it in place, including even ensuring that you petition through our courts to make judgments or to make interpretations and make proposals on laws that are supposed to be amended so that counties are benefiting from what is supposed to be due to them. Evans.
Right. When you look at, what is happening right now between the national government and the county government, it's something that we have witnessed over the time. And of course, this begs the question, when will it ever stop? It has become too many problems, too many, push and pull. And of course, we are just wondering, so where does it leave Kenyans? What is the way forward? And how can we actually, just like the president said, work in lines with, the constitution and harmoniously?
Where this leaves Kenyans is for us to be able to advocate for full devolution of functions. Of course, there are laws that support this particular process. We are looking at the constitution itself, looking at, of course, the different articles that strengthen devolution of functions. We are talking about Schedule 4 of the Constitution. We are talking about the Transition to Devolved Government Act of 2012, which therefore put in place the Transition Authority that did an excellent work, including even looking at the resources, the assets that were still being held by county governments. Where this leaves Kenyans is to look at the existing legal notices. We have so many notices that have been made, that have been put in place, especially by national government, that sometimes do not favor county governments. Where does this leave citizens? We need to scrutinize those legal notices and ensure that the biggest chunk of beneficiaries or rather of benefits become beneficiaries of the counties, and that is the Kenyan citizens. Where this leaves Kenyans, Evans, is right now, in fact, today as we speak, up to the 28th of February, we are doing what we call the budget, the county fiscal strategy planning, the county fiscal strategy papers, which is within the budget cycle. And we are at the point where citizens are being called now for public participation. What they are doing is to scrutinize the budget, provide their priorities, and then those priorities will form the allocations within the budget. The Kenyan citizens should be able to provide memoranda documents both to county governments and also to national government, pushing for fully devolution of functions that are due to county governments. Of course, not so many people might be aware about this, but the law also expects that when we are doing the division of revenue allocation, these allocations are supposed to be done using the last audited financial accounts. Sad to mention is that we are also dwindling back on the audited accounts. And that is partly why governors are of the opinion that they should be getting almost 450 billion. But when you talk to the Commission on Revenue Allocation through the Division of Revenue Allocation Act, they will tell you that through the last audited accounts of the Kenya government, the amounts that are due to county governments is what you actually mentioned, which is about 398.14 billion. That really means that as much as we are moving on, but we are actually not moving on, because there is an institution or there are people that are supposed to be doing their work called the audit committees that are supposed to be sitting and doing and ensuring that we are up to date in our audits. But that has not been done. So even as we talk about where this is leaving Kenyans, we also need to call upon the institutions of parliament and any other institutions that are relevant to devolution working to be able to do their work, particularly in appraising gaps that are still in existence. Evans.
Right. When you talk about this, the issue of funding of which has been a thorn in flesh of, many county bosses. And of course, this discussion, like I said, it's something that we have had it a number of times. Remember, it has been with the previous regime and now. And of course, when you look at the budget allocation, it's like every day, or rather every financial year, it seems to be, narrowing down a little bit slower. Now, from the proposed 450 billion to 391 billion, when then these points, are clear. conflicts when it comes to these particular resources. Even as we wind up this particular discussion, I just want to get your thought on this, the issue of funding, and of course, what is the proposed way forward so that we can have a government, and of course county government, that works in a harmonious way, so that we can avoid the push and pull between the two levels of government.
The Constitution of Kenya provides for 48 governments, 47 county governments, and 1 national government. That constitution prescribes purely the functions of both national and county governments. Why we are having these conflicts, Evans, is politically motivated. Because, and when we began this conversation, you also indicated that there are concerns with community health promoters. The national government has no business meddling in the affairs of county governments on community health promoters, purely because primary health care is a devolved function. Empower the county governments and devolve all those resources to county governments, so that this issue about matching of funding, our county governments will pay this much and then we match as national government this much, that should not happen. But it is happening because if it doesn't go that way, what will the president tell Kenyans when he's campaigning tomorrow? Remember, during the campaigns, disregarding the Schedule 4 functions, we saw so many presidential candidates talking about what they will do for county governments, but what they will do for citizens. But what they failed to understand was that when it comes to the constitutional implementation aspects, there are certain functions that you cannot talk about. So one, let our leaders implement the constitution to its spirit and to its letter. Number two, so that we stop all these quarrels, is to empower counties to undertake what is called on-source revenue, which therefore means that on-source is what you have at source without what you are getting back from national government. And there are so many ongoing processes that today are in conjunction with the Council of Governors, the Intergovernmental Relations and Technical Committee, and other stakeholders, including organizations like ours, County Governance Watch, to be able to advocate for and ensure that counties are empowered. Our counties are organized in what we call regional economic blocks. What is the value for those regional economic blocks if at that source?
Mr. Osido, we are running out of time, and thank you a lot for this insightful conversation. Unfortunately, time is not on our side, and we thank you so much, and of course for making time for this, and asante sana for making time, Mr. Osido.